Welcome to another week in our lovely course, Planning Design for Health and Wellbeing. I'm absolutely delighted that I'm having an absolute fantastic, brilliant mind from practice today with us, Gavin Hardy, who has an extensive experience in food forest and planning, designing for foods in our urban environments, and therefore addressing some pressing needs and emerging issues that we as planners and designers really have to face and tackle. So I'm gonna, with no further ado, hand over to Gavin. I let him introduce himself a little bit, and after the contribution, we go probably maybe in a little into bit of Q&A between both of us, and hope you can take some messages away. And if you later have more questions, please feel free to reach out to me, and then I'm happy to curate and maybe facilitate some of the questions and find the answers for you. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm handing over to you, Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Hi, everyone. Hope you get a lot out of this presentation. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge the First Nations people on the land on which I'm coming to you from, and that's the Yagara and Turrbal people. I'm coming to you from a place known as Kurilpa, which is the area of South Brisbane that encompasses the suburbs of South Brisbane, West End, Highgate Hill, and Dutton Park, I believe. If not sure where all you guys are coming from, where you're beaming in from, but I want to just acknowledge First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging from wherever we're coming from today. So I'm going to share screen in a little bit, and I'm going to talk about a few things. One is a model around food forestry or community food more generally. I'm going to go through a presentation that I did with the ACT government last year, working on a project with them. And then I'm going to show you some inspirational community food forest projects from around the world. And before we dive into that, I'll give you a bit of a definition of what a food forest is, because I imagine most of you aren't really familiar with that concept. All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to just share screen. Going to go up to the top of the slide number 1. We go from the beginning. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit about me. So my name is Gavin Hardy. As you already know, I am the Queensland State Coordinator of the National Community Gardens Network peak body, which is Community Gardens Australia. And we've been around since the 1990s. I'm also the Adult Education Coordinator at one of the country's largest community food projects, which is Mulvey Street City Farm in Brisbane. It's on a 2.5 hectare site, employs 12 people, mainly part-time, runs various enterprises, and has quite a big education program, mainly around living sustainably in the city. So I teach, coordinate, and consult in community food, and I've been doing that for about 25 years now. And I've also worked as a landscape architect for local government and as an engineer in private practice. I'm also a Winston Churchill Fellow. So in 2022, I travelled overseas and looked at community food forests and community orchards as potential models for Australia. So this part of the presentation, I'm going to cover off on a few things. As you can see there, community food framework, service delivery models, benefits, challenges, site planning, site design, governance, and fundraising. So what is community food? I see community food as a part of urban agriculture, and urban agriculture as a part of the green infrastructure of a city. This isn't to say that community food doesn't happen beyond the urban fringe, it certainly does. But my focus has always been within cities. I talk about the phrase community food rather than community gardens, because as you'll see in one of the next slides, community food projects are way beyond gardens as such, the typology of a garden. So community foods I see as part of urban agriculture. Urban agriculture also includes commercial farms, typically market gardens on the peri-urban fringe. People growing food in their backyards used to be a very big thing decades ago. We're losing a bit of that now, particularly through infill development in the inner cities around Australia and around the world. And there's also hybrid and emergent practices coming through urban agriculture as well. I guess community food projects have a really strong community development and public health angle. And, you know, from my research, I found that the best practice programs run by government around the world, for example, the PPATCH program at the City of Seattle, they're typically run through departments of neighbourhoods, not so much parks departments or recreation departments, because those governments see community food projects as part of their community development agenda, not so much as part of an urban agriculture agenda or a parks delivery program. It's an important thing to keep in mind if you're thinking about going into local government and implementing community garden projects or community food projects more generally. There's a whole lot of different models around community food. You can see why I don't call it community gardens. Here's a few of them. So allotments, typical allotments have been around for a really long time. They sort of emerged out of Europe in the early part of the 20th century. There's learning gardens, demonstration gardens, there's community supported agriculture, research gardens, edible arboreta, edible school gardens, agri-hoods, community orchards, service gardens, on and on it goes. And the main types that we see emerging around the world and in this country, verge gardens, currently fairly popular, people growing food on the street verge. City farms. City farms have multiple functions. They have lots of different types of gardens usually within them, and they run enterprises. There's learning gardens where typically staff are teaching children how to grow food. There's community supported agriculture where a group of people will form a cooperative to support a farmer or two to grow food for them, and that group of people may well get involved in the growing and harvesting of the food from a local farm. There's the allotments where you'll rent a plot. It could be a 10 by 10 metre plot or smaller to grow mainly vegetables and herbs, although in some places, like in the United Kingdom, people are growing fruit trees on their allotments. Community orchards, they're becoming more popular. Edible school gardens, so think about the Stephanie Alexander kitchen garden program, which has been around, must be close to 20 years now around this country. And then there's service gardens, so folks who are growing food for the food banks and for charity purposes. So they're sort of the main types of community food that are around at the moment. So there's lots of different ways of delivering this stuff, and I guess this part of the presentation is talking about how an organisation might support community food projects across the whole city or across the whole region. And this was a big part of my Churchill Fellowship research and investigations that I did overseas in 2022 and continue to look at. So the first model I sort of came up with was the multiple site service provider. So this is a type of model where an organisation sets up to establish and maintain sites across the whole city. They offer that service for no or low cost to the communities they work with, but they have paid staff and they spend a good amount of time vetting communities before they take on their projects. And the way that they pay their staff is usually through funding models that work with government or the corporate sector, corporate philanthropy, or very strong membership bases that have hundreds, if not thousands, of members that are contributing to the organisation. So an example of that is the UK Orchard Project. UK Orchard Project operates in 7 cities across the UK. It employs about 15 people at the moment, has a budget of around 600 or 700,000 pounds, which is equivalent to about 1.2 million Australian dollars, something like that. And they've implemented, from memory, maybe about 550 orchards across the UK, community orchards, since about 2008. And there's lots of other great examples around the world. The model, another type of model is the urban orchard service. So that's a model that harvests the city's fruit trees and fruiting shrubs from all over the place. So think about the city or place where you live. There's probably fruit trees, nut trees, fruiting shrubs already in place in people's backyards or in public spaces. So when I think about the city of Brisbane, I think about all the old mango trees, for example, that are growing in Brisbane, bananas that are growing in people's backyards, and guavas and maybe avocados. So we already have an urban orchard. We don't even need to plant any trees, that already exists. And so there's, in some parts of the world, there's organisations that go out and harvest from that incredible stock of trees. For example, in Seattle, it's estimated that there's 7,000 apple trees throughout the Seattle region. So there's a group there called City Fruit, goes around and harvests one of those apple trees, donates a lot of that produce to charitable organisations, or turns the produce into value-added product like ciders, where they partner with a cidery and put some branding on the labels. Yeah, so they're harvesting the city's fruit trees in that way. The benefits of community food projects, there's a lot of health and wellbeing benefits, social connection. These projects bring people together. There's an epidemic of social isolation going on at the moment. It's been going on for a little while. And we know that community gardens, community food in general, brings people together to help them break out of that isolation. These projects offer fantastic public amenity. So if you're a landscape architect, landscape designer, consider incorporating community food into your projects. When I was overseas, and indeed in the places that I've operated in Australia, I find community food projects are just wonderful places to be in. Really nice places, and therapeutic spaces. So when I was in London, I visited a psychiatric hospital that had 200 apple trees in it, and they take the patients out to the apple orchard, and they get involved with stuff. They do meaningful activity, which is a really big part of the equation for mental health. It's just doing meaningful work, but just really delightful places to hang out in. So, and there's documented evidence about the benefits of community food projects in general around mental health. So capacity building, teaching kids how to grow food. There's a lot of that stuff that's going on around the world. Volunteer programs which train people in the community how to do pruning, how to look after fruit trees, how to grow veggies, how to do composting, all that sort of stuff. How to run an organisation. It's not just about the gardening aspect. It's about a lot of these invisible aspects that we sometimes take a bit for granted. But there's a lot of skill involved in running a community garden project. Dynamic governance models, things like sociocracy, introduces a new way of people being able to make decisions together. So a lot of stuff going on in the capacity building area. Sustainability, some groups, as I alluded to before, are growing food for the whole community, give it away for free. You can come in and just harvest whatever you like. Amazingly, those places seem to thrive really well in some particular localities. Ones I saw in Seattle, the Beacon Food Forest, for example, operates on that basis and is doing really well. Pretty amazing yields. So, some of the organisations that are harvesting from the city's urban orchard, the whole of the city's fruit and nut trees, they're getting 15 to 20 tonnes on average of fruit every year from the city. Amazing yields. Normally that fruit would just drop on the ground and go to waste and become a real hazard, become a problem for rats and rodents and pests. So they're turning a problem into a solution. And then edible plant diversity. So this is really interesting, and something I get excited about is that we know that currently most of the world's population gets their food from about five animals and 12 plants. That's it. That's incredibly brittle. It's very subject to climate variation. And yet we know there's at least, well, depending on who you talk to, 1,000 or maybe 5,000 different plants that you can eat that have some food value. Now, some are better than others, but some are harder to prepare than others. But there's this incredible plant diversity out there, and some of these gardens are growing amazing diversity. So Beacon Food Forest in Seattle has 1,000 species of edible plants. Not 1,000 plants, but 1,000 species of edible plants. The Agroforestry Research Trust in Devon are growing about 300 species of edible plant. So a lot we can learn from there. And also urban rewilding. So particularly in places like Europe where biodiversity has diminished somewhat, community food projects are bringing rewilding urban places. Some of the challenges, so funding is always a challenge around community food projects. I sort of explored a whole lot of different models around funding. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Partnerships and sponsorships and different enterprises. Volunteer involvement, that's an ongoing thing for community gardens. What I found was, I put here the 3 Fs, but I've now call it the 5 Fs, I think. So fun, fit, food, fire, and the feminine. So when I talk about fire, people love gathering around a little campfire. Particularly people in cities, we still have this sort of, I think it's almost like a primal yearning to be around fire. And what I found consistently was people just loved having a little campfire after the end of a hard day's volunteering. Interesting one. Yeah, empowering volunteers to get involved in community food is a big thing. I looked at harvesting and distribution. I looked at equipment and risk, training volunteers to climb up a harvesting ladder. It's about falling off, breaking their arm. How do you do that? And what's the risk? What's the liability? What's the insurance? Blah, blah, blah. There's a whole lot of stuff we need to understand. Then how do you process all that harvest? So there's a picture there in the middle of the screen. So there's an example of where a group in Canada have harvested apples, and they've partnered with a cidery, and they've turned the apples into really good apple cider. Oh man, that stuff was great. Obviously, getting into a few ciders. Other challenges, legibility, signage, how you make your way and work out how to navigate through the big community garden space. Having good signage is really important. Conflict resolution or conflict transformation processes, really important part of the equation. How we deal with theft and vandalism, a whole lot of different strategies around that. And then the red tape, working with government, how we get government on board with the whole community food agenda. A big part of this puzzle, and I guess particularly relevant for you guys who are doing, working in planning and design, is land use planning. We need to understand the site and then apply an appropriate gardening model to that site and its context. So when I talk about the gardening model, I alluded to before about the community, different ways of doing community food, whether it's a food forest or an orchard or, the allotments, whatever it is. We look at the physical features and the cultural context. Very important stuff to look into. And there's some sort of basic metrics, some starting points that people can work with. So standalone green spaces, we're looking to do that sort of work. We need a minimum of 0.5 to 1 hectare, depending on the type. You can have a standalone network of microsites. So that is a possibility. Conceptually, that's that diagram at the bottom centre of the screen. 200 square metre minimum of at least 10 sites within 5 minutes of each other. 5 minutes walking distance, I would say, maybe cycling. And if you integrate them with other community facilities like a library, sort of talking about a minimum of 200 square metres, that's a real minimum size. That's 10 metres by 20 metres. Central facilities, you need to have toilets, access to toilets, you need to have shelter for at least 20 people, a tool shed, food washing stations, potable water, power, all abilities, access bars, and a composting area. And look, it doesn't have to be ugly, be quite stylish. So that image at top middle, that's actually a tool shed in a very urban community garden in America, in Chicago. So this stuff can look good provided you got the funding. Site design, need to look at how you integrate these spaces into everyday spaces. So that image at top of the middle, that's an apple orchard integrated into a car park in Seattle. Really interesting concept, that one. Those apples have been netted, keep the birds off and the codling moth. Integrating them into the school curricula, so we can teach kids maths and science in community food spaces. There's an amazing project in Miami that is doing that right now. Interesting features. People are really attracted to bespoke looking buildings, nice community buildings that they can get access to. Habitat devices like insect hotels. There's a deluxe one there on the middle right of the screen. Big insect hotel right there. That's in Italy, at a garden I visited in Italy. And then the plants. So mixed species guilds of plants, and there's thousands of edible plant species to choose from. Community planning is really important. If you don't get the community planning involved, you don't get the community involved with the whole planning of the project right from the beginning. They often fall over, these projects. So you need community buy-in. You need community members, a core group of 3 to 5 people at least, being given ownership in inverted commas, of the project. It's a really challenging thing for local government to get their head around, and government in general don't like to release the control. But the research indicates that that's a very important part of the puzzle. Okay. Participatory planning and co-design processes, charrette-style design workshops, permaculture design courses with practicum. So don't know what the permaculture concept is. It's a system of design based on the principles of ecology. In my view, it's probably one of the closest things we have to ecologically sustainable development. And it's a great way for people to go. And ongoing dynamic governance models. What have we got here? Yeah, not-for-profit. So there's different ways of doing the governance. So there's not-for-profit groups out there. That's the main model around, but there's also commercial models out there for doing community food. It's an interesting idea, but there are some great examples around the world of community food projects on private land. Paid coordinators for long-term resilience. You really do need to have paid staff, particularly if you're going 5, 10, 20 years into it. And organic gardening skills training, that's a really important part of the picture as well. By funding models, there's lots of ways of raising money in community food projects, whether it's through earned revenue, through social enterprise, philanthropic foundations coming on board, donors and sponsors, government grants, crowdfunding. Government grants are the usual way in Australia that community gardens start up. Smaller types of community gardens, so little local community gardens in the suburb have less diverse funding streams, less opportunity. But there are still some opportunities out there for the smaller projects. Revenue options. When I travelled around the world, I saw a whole stack of different ways that people were earning money through social enterprise for their organisation. They were running gourmet tours. People would come in, they'd get a tour of the garden and then sit down to a gourmet meal prepared by top chefs from the city. There's one organisation just out of Washington DC. They charge $150 a head for a gourmet meal, and they'll get 50 people to that event. And he runs that one every two or three times a year. So interesting one. Fresh produce sales, bespoke alcoholic beverages and preserves like jams, apple sauces, that sort of thing. Specialist tree care services, garden design services, community education, jobs training programs, publishing and merchandise, plant nurseries, festivals and music events, farmers markets, stalls and rentals, and compost sales. And that is not an exhaustive list. There's lots of different ways you can do this if you're willing to think outside the box. Okay. Okay, so that's that part of the story. Now I'm just going to type out of there. I'm going to stop sharing screen and then jump back into the other presentation. So this little presentation is some examples of how you can do community food. I'm just going to go back right to the beginning. This more or less focuses on my Churchill Fellowship, which was looking at community food forests and community orchards around the world. So I travelled to North America, Canada, United Kingdom, and the Netherlands and Italy, looking at these different ways of doing community food. A bit unusual. We don't really have long-term examples in this country of community food forests and community orchards. I've already talked about myself there. What is a food forest? Okay, so if you think about a food forest, guys, or think about a forest, I should say. You go to a national park and you walk into a beautiful forest. And what is the first thing you notice? Well, the first thing you probably notice is the trees. And they're really tall trees that are forming the canopy of the forest. So all forests around the world have a structure that repeats itself. So think about that forest that you're in. It'll have those tall canopy trees. It'll have smaller trees likely below that. It'll have shrubs below that. It'll have a herbaceous layer. It'll have ground covers, and it'll have vines growing up the trees. So that pattern in nature is repeated all around the world, in forests all around the world. And so food forests mimic that pattern, mainly using edible plants that are useful for humans, plus support species, things like nitrogen-fixing trees, pollinator species that bring in the bees and the other pollinating insects. So food forests mimic that pattern because we know that forests have one of the highest yielding biomass systems in the world. There's probably only one other system that's higher in biomass yield, and that's the kelp forests underneath the ocean and the coral reefs. So we try to mimic that structure in food forestry. Food forestry is a part of agroforestry. So there's a whole lot of science around agroforestry. It's been studied for about 50 years. There's a whole lot of research in agroforestry. Food forests are thought to have been around for at least 15,000 years in the pre-Columbian Amazon. So it's thought that the Amazon rainforest was actually, most of it was probably a food forest before the conquistadors discovered the Amazon basin in the 1500s. There were hundreds of thousands of people living in the Amazon basin. So there's some anthropology to support that notion. And so that's what a food forest is. They're highly resilient and abundant. They're thought to be the highest yielding food system ever devised in terms of what you get out of it, what you put into it. And it utilises long-lived plants arranged in guilds. Okay, so some really great examples of community food forests. So this is a food forest in Morocco, in the foothills of the Atlas Mountains. It's thought to be the world's oldest food forest. There's 400 years of written evidence around this particular site, and there's 2,000 years of oral history of this site. So in that sense, it's inherently sustainable, isn't it? This is a sustainable food system. It's possibly the largest food forest in the world that we know of. That's 65 hectares in size. It's dominated by date palms, as you can see in the picture, with olives, citrus, bananas, and pomegranates as the mid-story layer. There's broad beans that you can sort of see in the photo there, actually, below all those trees. And the incredible thing about this site is it's surrounded by desert. It's in a very arid part of the world. And it's been looked after for a very long time. And they're growing bananas in this food forest, which is incredible when you think about where this is located. And there's permanent water in this system, whereas the surrounding landscape does not have any permanent water. So the vegan food forest, I talked about that before. In Seattle, over 1,000 edible species. It's a great model for how you do volunteers, attracting people to your community food project. They get 50 plus volunteers at every session they get to. They run once a month on a Saturday, and they donate all of their produce. It's open 24/7. You can come in and harvest whenever you like. And it seems to work really well. And part of their success about volunteers is that they have drinks around the fireplace after the session. Forestry schools in Miami, they're operating in 28 primary schools. They're looking to get that up to 51 primary schools, elementary schools in the city of Miami-Dade County in America. They run their maths and science classes in the food forests, and the kids are getting much better results. They do gardening and nutritional education in the food forest. The kids take home food to mum and dad, and the teachers are fully supported to have the food forest at their school. This is the Agroforestry Research Trust in Devon. It's run by world expert Martin Crawford. He is trialling the food forest in a glass house to sort of model what food forestry is, or what growing food could look like in England in 50 years' time with the climate heating up. So in this glass house, the temperature is set to about an average daytime temperature of 30 degrees, which is about 8 degrees or 5 degrees higher than the current average in his part of the world, which is Devon in the UK. So they're growing bananas and tamarillos and a whole lot of stuff that we would see in Brisbane in that glass house.
Gavin, I think, sorry to interrupt, I think you just broke up, or I froze at my end because of the weather. I had a massive storm, so there might be a bit of a gap or a breakup at the moment.
Okay.
Do you just keep going from where you go, and then you have to be mindful of that there's a slip in the system?
Yeah. Okay, guys. So no worries. Hopefully you got to see a bit of that, but we'll keep on going. And I'm almost about to wrap up. So that was a great project in the Netherlands. A project where there are multiple sites, again, a multiple site service provider, doing 16 projects throughout Rotterdam and the Netherlands. So putting food forests into hospitals, school, apartment blocks, a whole lot of different places. And they partner with restaurants to sell produce and fundraise. Really unusual foods that they have growing there. Really interesting place. Because of food forest in Italy, thought to be the first public food forest in that country. Very heavy focus on rewilding, using food forestry, community food to rewild a public place. Signage, really important part of their project. Really great examples of how you do signage in a public place. And then finishing up with Christchurch in New Zealand. So after the earthquake in 2011, it's been a big push to have public space available for foraging for food and for edible parks. So there's about 26,000 fruit trees on public land in Christchurch. as a result of houses being demolished and moved away, and what was left was the fruit trees left in people's backyards. So in the red zone, so look up the red zone in Christchurch. That'll be a good thing to do. Have a look at that. That was suburbia, the red zone, and the backyards have become this massive informal park with a whole lot of fruit trees in it. And now the Christchurch City Council has a food resilience policy, which is really great to see. There's a couple of examples there of some of the food forests and orchards in and around Christchurch. I'm not going to go through that. We've done that before. Yeah. So there you go. That's me. I'm Gavin Hardy. I've got a YouTube channel. Just look at Hardy Permaculture. You can also look me up on LinkedIn, guys. Just have a look for Gav Hardy on LinkedIn. And if you want to have a look at my Churchill Fellowship report, just go to the Churchill website, search for my name under Projects and Fellows. I'm sure you better download my report. It's actually 2 reports. There's the main report and a case study report as well. All right. Thanks for listening. I'd love to ask you questions, but we're pre-recorded.
Thanks, Gavin. That was terrific. And sorry for the technological hiccup. I think it's the extreme weather outside at the moment on my end.
Yeah.
So, but on that note, and I was really delightful to hear also about the last example in Christchurch that the council has a food resilience policy now. Could you just briefly elaborate on that and what the role of the planners could be to fast track and also to mainstream some of the urban forest ideas or food forests? Yeah.
Yeah. So when I put together that presentation, that was last year. Hopefully, Christchurch Council is still heading down the track of encouraging food in the city. It's an urban agriculture strategy, isn't it? And there's some wonderful examples of local government and sort of regional government supporting community food, specifically urban agriculture in general. So I also encourage people to have a look at what the city of Dallas is doing in the United States. In fact, I just read on LinkedIn recently through a colleague based in Dallas, they've got $100,000 available for urban agriculture projects in the city of Dallas. So in terms of the planning, I guess it's around promoting the benefits of urban agriculture to the city's politicians, where the benefits are. We need to be able to show the metrics. Some work around documenting the benefits. It's emerging. This stuff's coming out. We need to do a lot more of that work so we can actually, for the pointy-headed planners out there, there's probably some of you in the space right now, you want to see the metrics, don't you? You want to see demonstrable benefits. We need to combine that with, that's the head, the heart is the stories coming out from community about why they think it's a good idea. So it's a combination of the two. I think if planners can support that research effort, that's a big part of the equation. Community foods around land, we need to allocate land, and land is always contested, isn't it? In urban space. And so that's why we need to be able to talk up the benefit, because we're always going to be competing for land to be able to do this work. Having said that, we don't need big areas. We can have networked food forest systems or networked community food systems. We can integrate community food projects into the public space that already exists. So we can integrate it into community facilities already, like libraries, schools, that sort of thing. That's already happening in this country. And it'd be great to see how the planning schemes can make that the reality happen more easily. But that sort of thing. And I think, another part of this equation is the funding around it. So um, how can we encourage some innovative funding models,
Mm. Mm.
community food?
And I think particular also, I mean, just thinking out loud in that sense, in response to your contribution, is when you see the impacts of climate change, what it has on lifestyles and urban densification and the
Yeah,
foreseeable future. There's so many benefits that are coming through, which say plant trees to create micro comfort environments, etc. And I think there's so many co-benefits with like with food forests and community gardens you can actually harness to really make these productive urban landscapes. In that sense, if you want to get the buy-in from the economist as
yeah,
perspective. And I think you touched on that really strongly in your contribution. I mean, just out of interest, when you think about the catchment of Brisbane and in the context of food sovereignty, given that there is an increasing amount of greenfield development in suburbia out there, where people have very little to none backyards and developers essentially, maximizing the yields for yeah, dwellings.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, and I think that is a. Do you have any thoughts around that at the moment in terms of
yeah. Well, I
condition?
wrote in a LinkedIn post recently around how infill development is creating a generation of people who in some parts, particularly inner cities,
Mm,
who no longer have gardening skills.
mm,
That's part of it. I mean, the other part of it is we're getting so busy that we don't have any time for a garden.
mm,
It's a bit of a vicious circle going on there.
mm,
So I think a policy. If I'm talking to planners, I only see a few planners who are seriously looking. We're taking community food projects seriously. It's sort of seen as a side issue. It's off to the side. You know, it's something the community people do over there, but they're not really important, um, which is really unfortunate.
mm,
But there's so many documented benefits that would feed into what councils and local and state government and even feds are wanting to try and achieve. So we think about the urban heat island, or moderating climate in cities. So community gardens have an enormous role to play in that. We think about the mental health crisis
mhm,
and how community gardens can play a role in bringing people together. There's a huge piece there that community food can contribute to. We think about that there's a lot of there's a lot of people who are going without 3 meals a day because they can't get access to fresh food. I think one of my colleagues, Nick Steiner, was saying there's about 40,000 families
mm,
in this country at
mm.
the moment who are going without 3 meals a day. This is Australia. We're
Yeah.
talking about Australia here.
Mm,
Um, uh, and community food projects, the charitable food project part of community food has a great role to play in that. So community food has potential to be seriously addressing a lot of these issues, but we just don't seem to be able to get the planners to, at the moment, see that.
mm,
And that's going to be, I think, a part of the big role of the movement is to, in the coming uh, years, is to integrate more with the planning profession.
mm, mm,
Okay, you're trying to achieve these goals, guys. This is where we can help. But we
mm,
can't help you unless we have the support.
mm,
Because in the community food movement, we've got arguably 50 years of experience. Um, and we're starting to get a lot of documented evidence around it. So that's where I think we can start to work together with the planners. Yeah.
yeah. Beautiful. Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it. I loved also your examples from Morocco, heavily arid and water scarce, and they've been able to create a whole ecology around it, which is self-regulating and also, been nurturing. I mean, I think given, from my personal history with permaculture, I mean, it's probably also useful to maybe share some observation around how labor intensive that can be or not be, to pull some, misconception out of the way. But it's very much linked to, intricately, you briefly touched on that as well, onto our lifestyles. And also that, what I call it, the hurry virus, which most people in urban environments suffer on. I think it's almost like a spatial cure to treat people from the hurry virus and actively have this
Yeah,
immersed sensual experience between, eating your own warm cooked meal you just harvested and then socializing around the bonfire. Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And this is one of these cultural issues that take decades
Mm,
for that cultural change to happen. But with support from um, government, from industry, from the corporates, they can support that change.
mm,
Uh, there's many people out there who are wanting to make that happen, but it needs to be, that support needs to come in. Yeah, we do live in a very hurried culture. We seem to be getting more sped up. The antidote to me seems to be to slow down.
mm,
Um, and how can we help that to happen? So yeah, there's some big cultural shifts I think need to change for us to fully effectively get into this work. But we've got to start somewhere.
mm,
The problems that we see in the world started with one person taking on the idea, and now we've got billions of people who are caught up in the system. Well, the solutions are going to start with a few of us, and then lots more people getting involved. That's how we get out of
mm,
the problems of the world. But if we keep on encouraging and supporting the same thinking, then we're never going to get out of the problems. So the problems that we have. So that's right. Would be imploring or a shift of supporting a different way of working with food.
mm.
Um, not just community food, but the whole local food movement um, around Australia and around the world.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks. I'm just mindful of time. I wish I could talk much longer, but unfortunately we have to also a bit of wrap up and then get to the exercise. But I'm absolutely grateful for your contribution, and also congratulations on the Churchill Fellowship. That was definitely a societal investment worth spent, and I'm sure that the benefits will rake in. Or if they already know, if they I think they're already doing it, but. I think it's such a pressing issue, and we can't have more allies there. We need more people like you. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Greg, and good luck everyone with your studies. If you want to get in contact with me, just get in contact with me through LinkedIn.
Hmm. Thanks.